In the world of budget-friendly microphones, there are a couple of brands that have established themselves as the go-to options in recent years, and Maono is one of them. Today, I've got the PD200X, which is a dual-output dynamic microphone for $79. Is it worth the price, or are there better options out there? Let's take a closer look. Before we dive in, I want to mention that Maono sent me the PD200X for the purpose of making this review. However, I was not paid to make this video, and all opinions I share will be my own based on my testing of the PD200X. All right, so far you've been hearing the PD200X recording over USB into my MacBook, and I don't have any special settings going on in the Maono Link software, but we'll take a look at the software a little bit later and the different options you have in there. We'll also, of course, be testing the XLR output, and we will get to some comparisons with other competitor microphones in a similar price range, as well as a couple that are a little more expensive. So we'll get into some audio samples of all these other microphones shortly, but first let's do a quick rundown of the features and specifications of the PD200X, and we'll also do some samples of the XLR output as well. The PD200X comes with an 8-foot USB cable and shock mount with 5/8-inch threading. The build material is all plastic except for the mesh grill underneath the foam windscreen, which is metal. It has a cardioid polar pattern and a frequency response of 40 Hz to 16 kHz, and the sensitivity over XLR is -52 dBV. Over USB, it has an adjustable gain range of 0 to 42 dB, and conversion is 24-bit 48 kHz. On the back of the microphone, there is a USB-C port and an XLR port, a 3.5mm headphone jack for latency-free monitoring and playback, and a button which controls the RGB lighting, which can be turned off by long pressing the button. On the top of the microphone, there is a mute button and a knob for controlling both the microphone gain and the headphone volume. All right, now in the Maono Link software, all you have to do here is select your device, and it will take you to the standard and the advanced settings tabs. The standard tab is the default, and you will also find controls for the gain of the microphone and the headphone volume. You can also turn monitoring off and on by switching that button there. And then you have your tone control. Right now it's on original. It should default to original. If you switch it to deep, you should hear a lot more of the low end come in there. And if you switch it to natural, you should hear a lot more of the high end come in there. I don't find either of those personally all that great to listen to. There is also a legacy option, which I believe maybe that's going for a little bit of an analog sound, maybe a little saturation. You can also control the RGB here. You can turn it on. You can adjust the brightness. You can change which setting it's on, as well as turn it off. If you go into the advanced mode, you still have control over the microphone's gain and the headphone settings, but now instead of just 3 choices, you have an EQ where you can do flat, a high-pass filter, that's what this sounds like, a presence boost with no high-pass filter, that's what this sounds like, or a high-pass filter and presence boost, and that's what this sounds like. Below that, you have a limiter and a compressor. If you check the box for the limiter, you can then reduce the threshold and say where you want the limiter to kick in. So I can say I want it to limit at -2, and with the compressor, if we turn that on, I can then turn down the threshold until we start to get some compression. I've turned the threshold down to -12, so you should hear a little bit of compression kick in. You can see that it goes all the way down to -80 here. I don't know why you would ever turn it down this far. I should note, though, that these controls are only in the advanced mode. So if we go back to standard, and now we're back to original, we're going to lose all those settings that we just played around with in advanced mode, and we only have these basic controls here. So there you go. That's the Maono Link software. While we're still connected over USB, let's just do a couple of quick tests here. First, we'll test for plosives. Peter picked a podcast, and now I'll bump the boom arm to see how well the shock mount rejects those vibrations. And the cable as well. See how it picks up handling noise of the cable and some desk bumps. And now I've got the XLR connected to the Focusrite Scarlett Solo, and that's connected to my MacBook, and I've got the USB output also connected to my MacBook. We're recording both outputs at the same time using Audio Hijack. We're recording those in separate WAV files, 24-bit 48 kHz on both, and I'm going to switch back and forth between those tracks so you can hear if there's any difference between the sound of the USB and the sound of the XLR output. And again, I'm not using any of the different feature settings in the Maono Link software for the USB output. I just have it set on original. So this is how it sounds over both USB and XLR when you record to both outputs at the same time. And by the way, yes, you can record from both outputs at the same time. And now we'll do a few comparisons. I just want to run through a few of the other options on the market that also have both a USB and an XLR output so you can hear what some of them sound like. We'll start with the ones closer in price range to the PD200X. So this is the sound of the PD200X over USB. And here's a sample of the Samson Q2U, which you can get for around $60 on Amazon. It includes both USB and XLR outputs. It also comes with both XLR and USB cables, which is important because it's not USB-C, it's micro or mini. It's one of those two that we don't really use anymore. It's also a 16-bit conversion rather than 24-bit, but here's how the Q2U sounds. And here's a sample of the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X. This goes for $79, so same base price as the PD200X. It also has 24-bit 48 kilohertz conversion over USB, and the output is USB-C, but there is no software to shape the sound at all on your computer. This is the sound you're going to get over USB. So there you go, ATR 2100X. And here's a sample of the Samson Q9U, which is another dual output USB XLR microphone. Output is USB-C. Conversion is 24-bit 48 kilohertz. I have the mid-boost frequency switch engaged because that's how I prefer the sound. It also has a high-pass filter, which I do not have engaged. The Q9U is listed for an MSRP on Samson's website of $199. However, it's regularly on Amazon, in the United States at least, for around $100. I've seen it as $99. I've seen it as $129. So it's usually in that $100 to $129 range in the United States. And this is the Rode PodMic USB, which goes for $199 in the US. It has both USB-C and XLR output. However, the PodMic USB does not allow you to use both the USB and the XLR outputs at the same time. So that is something to be aware of with this microphone. It does have internal DSP built into it, which you can control with any of Rode's apps, including Rode Connect and Rode Central. But there you go, sample of the PodMic USB, which goes for over 2 times the price of the PD200X. And our last comparison sample here is going to be the Shure MV7. This goes for $249. And yes, I have a windscreen from the SM7B installed on it because the windscreen provided with the MV7 is terrible at blocking plosives. Hey everybody, I didn't realize until after I was already editing this video that the Shure MV7 had some DSP settings retained from the last time I used it, and it was not noticeable when I was monitoring while recording. Apologize for that, but it had the high-pass filter and medium compression engaged, so if it sounded funny to you, that's why. This is what the MV7 sounds like over USB with none of the processing engaged. This is in the flat mode with none of those options turned on. All right, so now let's talk some pros and cons for the PD200X, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. So first up, for pros for the PD200X, I would say the sound quality is better than I would expect for the price point, seeing as how you can get this usually discounted anywhere from $69 to as low as $59 on Amazon. I would say the sound quality is better than I expect. It's definitely more full in the low end, and in the high end, well, none of these microphones are that great in the high end, to be honest. As far as dynamic microphones that have a smooth top end in the budget range, in the budget-friendly range, not many of them are, in my opinion, going to have a very smooth top end in the higher frequencies. So overall, I would just say the sound quality is better than I would expect for the price. Is it the best sounding microphone on the market? No. Another pro would be the software it comes with. It's not really super detailed, doesn't give you a lot of granular control, but it keeps things basic, and at least it gives you some ability to shape your sound a little bit. Now, another big pro for me, especially at this price point, is that both the XLR and USB outputs can be used at the same time. Another pro for me is that the RGB lighting can be turned off. Another pro would be the physical controls for the gain and the headphone volume, as well as the mute button. I always like having a physical control on the mic for the actual gain if it's a USB mic, because otherwise you've got to do it in software. It's just easier, I think, to do it with a physical control, and a mute button's always great, even though the mute does not work for the XLR output. It only works for the USB output. And the last pro I'll mention is the sensitivity over XLR is minus 52 dBV, which is higher than a lot of other dynamic microphones. I've been using the PD200X with the Focusrite Scarlett Solo 3rd Gen, which tops out at about 56 dB of gain, and I don't have it set to 100%, and I'm getting a perfectly decent recording level. All right, now let's talk cons. So for me, first con, all plastic build, except for that that mesh grill underneath the foam windscreen. All plastic generally always means less durable. If you drop this thing, I don't know what's going to break. Something may break, something may not break. Then in terms of performance, I have a few cons here. It's not great. Didn't do well with the handling bumps, even though it comes with a shock mount. Another con would be the plosive performance with the provided windscreen. Not great. Now, a con for the physical controls, even though I like that they're there, as I mentioned, they're pretty loud. So if I just use the mute button here, you can hear the clicks. There you go. That's what it sounds like when you're using the mute button. And the last con for me is that, to me, the XLR and the USB options, those outputs sound a bit different. For you, that may not be a con, but I think it has something to do with the USB output. To me, always has some sort of processing going on, even when it's on the basic mode in the original setting. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's actually what's happening, but that's what I feel like when I hear those two back to back out of the same recording. Let me know what you think in the comments, though. So at the end of the day, would I recommend the PD200X? Well, it depends. It really depends on what you're looking for and what your budget is. If your budget is firm at the $80 or less price point and you're just not really looking to spend more than that, and you also need dual output, I would say, yeah, you could definitely do worse than the PD200X. You've got these other options here in that price range that also have the dual output. The ATR 2100X, I think, is a good value for the price. I don't mind the sound of it. I prefer the sound of this actually over the Q2U, which again, feel free to disagree with me in the comments. So honestly, I could go either way. It's probably just going to come down to which one do you prefer for your voice. They both are a little bit harsh in the upper frequencies. I think there's a little bit more low end on the PD200X, but that'll do it for my review of the PD200X. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you preferred one of these microphones overall, as well as in the more budget-friendly category. Let me know if you have a PD200X and how you're liking it. If you found the video helpful, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button. Don't forget to subscribe to the Semi Pro Tech and Gear channel as well. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.